I'm Alex.
And I'm Brennan.
And today we are discussing forgiving Filoni, what he did right.
We don't know the extent of what was George and what was Filoni fully in the Clone Wars, but we assume that Filoni had his hands in most of what happened in TCW. So we're just going to try to do the impossible and find what went right with the Clone Wars, which is probably easier said than done. And we have Marcel to help us with this today.
When they originally approached me, they said, "Hey, Marcel, you kind of look like Dave Filoni, so let's have you on this so that you can tell us what he was thinking at the time." and I said, Alex, Brennan, that's not how this works. Just because I look like him doesn't mean I can think like him. Speaking for myself, I simply just cannot forgive Filoni. No, I'm kidding. If I couldn't, then I wouldn't be here.
We know that you're secretly a fan, Marcel.
Yeah, it couldn't stay secret forever. So here I am. That's my most shameful secret. But I do think, like most things in Star Wars, we can focus on the positives and we can talk about some of the things that we think Filoni got right, some of the things that may have been missed opportunities, maybe some of the things we would have liked to see.
Yeah.
Here's something I wanted to ask you guys, because there's a lot of negativity, obviously, about TCW in the EU community side of things. And, I watched it as a kid. I liked it as a kid. When I got older and I rewatched it and I'd been reading the EU, I was like, I hate this. It contradicts the EU so much. Mm-hmm. If the show did not contradict the EU in so many places, in so many ways, would that have made it better to us as EU fans? Is it just the contradictions that make it bad, or is it the stories themselves? And even if the contradictions weren't existing there, would we still dislike it as much as we do? What do you guys think?
I think it's a mix, because I think there are times when the show is generally really good with its writing. Other times where it's just absolutely retarded, and I don't think there's anything that could save that. For example, I could think the worst of it, like when Cad Bane, I think it was, tried to trick C-3PO as they were trying to go buy a cake or whatever. I forget. I try to block it out, but that episode was really stupid. And also any episode that involves Jedi younglings, which are like more, I think, around season 5. Those are bad too. But as Matt has also said in multiple videos, when they focused on clones primarily, it tended to be really good, even if it wasn't 100% in line with Karen Travis's stuff. It usually tended to be pretty good. If it wasn't contradicting the EU and it was actually more in line with it, then I would have loved to see more clone stuff than we got. As much as I dislike Ahsoka, I think as the seasons go on, she gets tolerable. And she does have a decent relationship with Anakin. I just wish that time would have been devoted to Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship. But overall, I guess my point is that there are moments of brilliance, I think, but there's just so much schlock as well. So I think it would be an okay show if there was no EU contradictions.
Yeah, I agree. I'm pretty much of the same opinion. I think that it would be an okay show without the contradictions. So I originally watched the Clone Wars as an adult. I missed it entirely when I was growing. I guess when it came out, I would have probably been in my 20s anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I watched it for the first time, I would say, like 4 or 5 years ago. And it was better than I expected it to be. I will say that. But now I've been rewatching it, and not just in anticipation of this episode that we're doing, but also kind of separate and apart from that, just to see if my perspective has changed at all, because I've read so much more of the expanded universe and reread so much more of the expanded universe in that 5-year period. And my perspective has changed. I think the episodes aren't as good as I once thought that they were, for the most part. In the later seasons, it does get better as things kind of pick up. I don't really care about the clones. I've never found them to be compelling in the first place. Ahsoka Tano is a interesting character. I think she does have a lot of character development, but at the same time, I think she's very annoying. I do think that the contradictions are kind of like the cherry on top of me not really liking the show. But I do think overall, there are, like you said, Alex, moments of brilliance. There are some really good scenes in there. There are some really good character development moments. I think that it really does a great job with some of the characters that don't really get a lot of the spotlight, like Padme Amidala, for example. We get more Jar Jar. I'm a big Jar Jar fan, so I like that. I think people hate those episodes, but I actually think they're kind of fun, and they further confirm my theory that he's secretly a Sith Lord.
Right.
Yeah.
If only TCW had thrown in a George R. Binks reference,
It would have been complete. Yeah.
No, there's been an episode dedicated to that, to Jar Jar reconciling his issues with his father that tried to shoot himself at the thought of having to take care of him.
Yeah, that would have been an incredible episode. Instead,
could have been a great episode about fatherhood.
Instead, we got Bomb Bad Jedi.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I like Jar Jar in episode 1. Hot take, I know. But
so do I.
There's not a single episode of TCW where I enjoy him.
Oh, really? Okay, so you're of the opposite opinion then.
I have the opposite, yeah.
I like a lot of Jar Jar in TCW. I think more Jar Jar is always good Jar Jar, and he's pretty much consistent, I would say.
I'll give you this. Yeah. Sorry, I just thought about this at the moment. I didn't mean to interrupt you. So there's one episode, I forget, I think they're at the Tadorians' home planet or whatever, and he's trying to distract them. I forget for what purpose, but it's for the good of the Republic. But he proceeds to pick up all these plates and stuff.
Oh,
and starts doing a whole bunch of retarded things. I mean, that was one time I genuinely found it funny because it wasn't an accident. He was purposely doing that, but it was funny.
That was on the episode where they needed to distract the Neomodians and get Toydarian aid to Ryloth, right? They had to get past the blockade. Yeah.
I mean, just to expand on what I was saying earlier, I do think that it's an okay show. I still prefer the multimedia project generally, but also like the Clone Wars 2003.
Mm-hmm.
Tartakovsky, that show, I think is just really great and a lot more. It's shorter, but it's a lot more dynamic than TCW.
I agree,
definitely.
But TCW, I think, it really does have some great moments in it. And, Brennan, I know you wanted to talk about one in particular that you thought was really, or I guess not a moment per se, but a choice that show made to reintroduce a character that you thought was really good overall.
Oh yeah, so Darth Maul is obviously the major character who was thought to be dead. TCW reintroduced, and that's a controversial one. Not just for EU fans is that controversial, but for everyone. That decision was controversial, surprising, and this is going to be briefly unrelated, but sitting in the theater for the dreadful Disney canon Solo movie, the friends who I saw it with were so confused by Darth Maul coming back because they hadn't seen TCW. So I'm not sure why, but I just felt the need to mention that there. Some people who hadn't watched TCW were very confused and shocked when Maul showed up in Solo. I just thought I'd mention that. But anyways, it's a controversial decision to bring Darth Maul back. And I think it's done really well, which I think a lot of people would maybe disagree with that. But if you look at all of the material around Darth Maul from episode 1, he really is just a lackey. He doesn't really deserve the Darth title. Plagueis is around, Insidious is around, and they don't treat him like he's a Sith. Even Sidious, the master of Darth Maul, doesn't treat him really like an apprentice, I would argue. He is a lackey. He is like a dark acolyte. He's just an assassin and a tool to do their bidding. I don't think he was ever treated like a Sith. He may have thought he was, but he never acted like one and wasn't treated as such. When TCW brought him back, I would argue that the only place in the entirety of Star Wars where Darth Maul truly seems like a Sith is in TCW.
I agree.
He takes an apprentice for himself, and he takes all these criminal syndicates to build himself an empire. His goal is to destroy the Jedi, the ancient enemy of the Sith, and to establish his own rule of two and his own empire. He is motivated. He is evil. He is scary. Darth Maul is at his best in TCW. That's kind of a hot take, I would guess, but that's my favorite parts of TCW is when Maul is there, because I think they handled that really, really well.
Yeah, I agree. I think, too, taking the EU into account, I think Maul certainly considered himself to be a true apprentice. Whether or not, Sidious ever considered him an actual apprentice to himself is debatable. I would agree with you that he probably didn't. But I think for sure he took notes, because if we're accepting TCW into the canon of the EU, then clearly he was paying attention, because when he comes back and he's able to speak and we're able to actually hear his thoughts out loud in TCW, everything he does, everything he tries to do is in accordance with the Sith. Now, I think he, unlike Sidious, is not very good at long-term planning. I think he's very good at, I'm going to get all these criminal syndicates and I'm gonna go destroy the Jedi, and then he doesn't have a plan moving forward from there. So, because a lot of his plans kind of crumble soon after he'll build something up, it's great, and then it will crash spectacularly. It actually kind of reminds me of Dala a bit in that respect. But I do agree. I think, is it Sam Witwer doing the voice of Maul, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I think more than Starkiller, I think that's his best role is as Darth Maul. I think it's a really good performance, and while it's like this weird mixed bag for me where I absolutely hate the fact that he's still alive, because it really doesn't seem like he should be there. The thing is, though, every time he's on screen, he steals the show in that show. Even though I hate the premise that he's even still alive, he's the best part of the show for me. So it's this weird mixed bag for me. But I do absolutely agree.
You've really captured how I feel about it, because I hate that he's alive, but they do such a good job of it that I have to give them credit. Those were the most interesting parts of the show for me personally, was anything featuring Darth Maul. I was okay actually when I learned that Darth Maul survived. The whole too angry to die concept has always been a favorite of mine.
Ion from KOTOR 2.
Yeah.
He's literally just cracks and boils, and literally the moment you tell him to give up or that it's okay to just die, he literally just dies. So hatred can definitely keep you alive. For sure.
I think that's well established in the expanded universe.
Scion's body was literally crumbling apart.
It introduces, I guess, other issues into the timeline. It's Darth Maul's alive, but we don't really see his final fate in the expanding universe, and so we don't really know how he dies. And
unless you count old wounds.
Right. Yeah. It's one of those threads that, it's not tidy, right? It's not tidy. Yeah. But I did like that Darth Maul was brought back, even though I also didn't like it. It's kind of it's weird. That's how I feel about a lot of the Clone Wars, to be honest with you. I really like that they did something from a style, if I take it sort of just on its own and don't think of it in the wider context of the expanded universe. But then when I think about it in this wider context, I'm like, I really don't like that they did that, because it doesn't gel so well with everything else. But on its own merits, it's actually not a bad artistic decision. Mm-hmm. If I had to fall in one camp, it would be let's have this within continuity, even if the story suffers a bit. Yeah, but at the same time, we should be able to have both. And that's I think is a missed opportunity for Filoni. Is he could have tied this really well into the expanded universe. I know that there were some aspects that George Lucas was involved in, and he didn't really care about maintaining continuity. He wanted to change. I'm constantly told that Mandalore is one of those things.
Yeah, that's what I hear all the time.
George Lucas wanted to do his sort of his own thing with that, and that's fine. He's the creator; he gets to make those types of decisions. But I just really think it's a missed opportunity to not tie it into the Clone Wars multimedia project, because had they done this right, TCW could have been the last year of the war, really.
Yeah. That's what I headcanon it, which right. I hate headcanon. I never do it for the EU. I always accept what the EU says is absolute fact. But when I was going through the Clone Wars era, when I was reading every novel, every comic, every episode of the Clone Wars, for my sanity to maintain, I had to put basically all of TCW in the last year, which is unrealistic and not really possible, but it's the only way I could cope with it. So I just shoved it all in that last year.
Yeah, we could have had it all, right? We could have had that show, which, as we've all, I think, agreed, is at least an okay show and has moments of brilliance, as well as the multimedia project, and there wouldn't have been any continuity errors, right? Because I do think that the fact that it just contradicts so much of what came before really turns people off of it.
Especially if you're an EU fan. Yeah. If you're not an EU fan, it probably doesn't bug you that much, but if you care about the EU, then it's going to bother you a lot.
For sure.
It won't bother you, though, if you accept Marcel's wonderful theories about 4 Dathomires, 2
That's right.
Mandalores.
Every time there's a continuity error in the Clone Wars, I joke with people. I said, well, bear with me. What if there were 3 Dathomires? And then they're like, well, that wouldn't work because of X, Y, and Z. I'm like, okay, bear with me. What if there were 4 Dathomires? So I just keep introducing more and more to try and fix these
and
plots.
all of them have, since all of them are clones, they all have additional letters, additional vowels in the vein of Luke and his clone Luke.
That's right. Dathomir.
Yeah. What I've always had to try to do with like Dathomir and Mandalore especially, the only way I could cope is, and this was true for, I just finished Starfighters of Adumar at the time of recording this, and it was the first time in a Star Wars book that it was a planet that had different political things in different parts of the world, because usually you get an unrealistic unified belief system on a planet, and you're like, that's not how worlds work.
Looking at our world, there's over 300 different political systems.
Yeah. So
something like that.
That's the only way I could cope. I said that Mandalore that we see in TCW, this may not be the best. I haven't thought it completely through, but it helped me cope. That Mandalore that we see in TCW is like America to Earth, in which it's a large percentage of the planet, so it would still be advantageous to have that in the Senate, but it is not the entirety of the planet, and the rest of the planet is more like what Karen Travis seems to suggest it's like. So that way I thought that might help it a little bit. And it's the same thing with Dathomir, where that's just like some region of the planet with the weird Dathomiri witches that we see in that show. So that was the only way I could cope with it. And it's probably not perfect, but it's the best I got.
Well, I want to talk a bit about Asajj Ventress, because I recently rewatched an episode where it was the Night Sisters arc, the 3 episodes right before the Mortis arc.
Oh, yes.
And they show Asajj's backstory, right? And so they retcon it that she's no longer Ratataki. She's from Dathomir. She's a Night Sister. But there are ways
to reconcile it, I think.
Yeah, there are, definitely. But they also show that she, I think, was on Ratatak with her Jedi Master.
Kai Narek.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that tells me too, like that's I think a good example of them changing something that's already been pre-established, but also still trying to preserve what existed before.
It's fairly the same. There are just certain things you need to tweak a bit in order to make it fit with the comic. Like, I think the show starts with her with some weird alien dude that dies, and then the Jedi picks him up. If you just kind of block that out and ignore that, it can flow fairly well with the comics version of her backstory as well.
Right.
Why did Disney have to buy Star Wars when they did? The Clone Wars was wrapping up. Leland Chi could have explained all of this for us.
Yes.
He would have done it. It would have been beautiful.
That's the thing, right? It's that we'll never know what some of those retcons would have looked like, right? We'll never know what types of creative fixes could have been employed to fix some of this. It's up to us to kind of headcanon part of it. And I think that people are too quick to say, well, I just don't consider, and I'm guilty of this myself, but they say, I just don't consider TCW to be part of the expanded universe.
I completely get it. But the same thing with Christopher Nelson. I think it simply is a part of the canon, at least if we're going by what Lucasfilm said back in the day. So I have to try to reconcile it, even if I don't want to.
Yeah, it's really tough because it contradicts stuff in so many places. But for the people who say that they don't consider it part of the EU, it definitively is. For better or worse, it is part of the expanded universe continuity. You know, we got some really great tie-in media, which is another good thing that came of the Clone Wars. I love Darth Maul Death Sentence, Darth Maul Son of Dathomir, No Prisoners, like Alex just mentioned. There's some really great EU tie-in media that we wouldn't have gotten if it wasn't for TCW. So there was some good from it, but for better or worse, it is distinctly part of the expanded universe. But
that's right.
There are good parts, like we've mentioned Darth Maul. Alex mentioned Ahsoka and her story arc.
Yeah.
She went from the worst character ever to tolerable.
Yeah.
So that's
I can talk a
something.
bit about that, actually. I can talk a bit about Ahsoka because I just didn't really like her character at all, and I think that's the reason why I didn't watch the Clone Wars for years, because I was like, who is this? Why did they shoehorn in this apprentice of Anakin Skywalker? I thought she would have worked a lot better as maybe Obi-Wan's apprentice, because at that point Anakin had already been knighted, and so it would make sense that he takes on another apprentice, right? For better or worse, she's Anakin Skywalker's apprentice. That comes, that's Lucas approved if it didn't come from him himself. So we have to work with that. Putting that aside, I do think that she developed as a character over the show. In fact, she might have been the only main character that developed over the show, because people say that like Anakin did, but I just didn't really see it myself. Like, he's kind of the same in the beginning of the Clone Wars as he is at the end, and so is Obi-Wan.
I don't get this idea that is like, some people being like that have not read the EU, and they go, do you want to actually, because they hate on the prequels, go, you want to get character development for Anakin? You got to watch TCW. And I'm like, what changes? He's the exact same. The only thing is maybe he gets slightly more violent near the end of the show.
That's right.
He's already pretty violent throughout all of the show, so it doesn't say much.
And because Ahsoka is, Dave Filoni's pet project, she does get a lot of character development, which I think serves her well. When we're at the end of the show, I was like, you know what, I actually don't mind Ahsoka Tano. And, not to bring in any non-expanded universe things into this, but my opinion has since changed because of all the stuff that has occurred with Ahsoka Tano in what may or may not be another timeline.
Yeah.
Now, if I just stick to the expanded universe, which is what I'm going to do, at the end of the Clone Wars, I didn't mind her. I really, in fact, liked her dynamic with Captain Rex, whom I think is a great character.
In the expanded universe, unlike the unmentionable alternate timeline, her story ends with her leaving the Jedi.
Right.
We don't know what happens to her. I don't like headcanons. My headcanon is that there's another Jedi introduced in the General Grievous comic, who's a Togruta male named Cody T, who also leaves the Jedi Order before Order 66 and was around her age. My headcanon is that they met up and went and lived in isolation, and the rest of the galaxy unfolded without either of them present.
Yeah. And then another thing is that a headcanon, because I cannot accept anything else, the Barriss Offee being the reason why Ahsoka ultimately ends up leaving the temple. It's not Barriss. The Imperials did that to make it more spicy. It was some friend she had in the temple growing up that got disenfranchised with the Jedi Order and was doing all those terrorist bombings, because it makes no sense whatsoever for it to be Barriss Offee doing that.
And what if it was Ban Erin?
The one that got angry and fought Grievous? No, that one died. Never mind.
Ants from Jedi Apprentice. She was Obi-Wan's friend, but we don't know what happened to her.
I mean, maybe she'd be a lot older by then, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be a young person doing that. But now we're trying to fix contradictions. But we're talking about positives of Filoni.
See, inevitably, you try to talk about TCW, it's gonna eventually come down to contradictions and how we can rectify it. No matter if we're trying to criticize it, praise it, whatever, it's ultimately, as EU fans, gonna come down to how do we make this work? That's just the way the conversation will always go. But,
right. I was gonna ask any favorite arcs that you guys had from TCW. And Alex, I think I know you wanted to talk about one that you thought was probably the best arc in TCW, and I tend to agree with you.
I think it's the best of the show. It's the Umbaran arc with General Krell. I forget the species, but it's the same species as Dex.
Basilisk.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. And he's basically like a flesh and blood General Grievous, because he has like 4 hands. Now, I also have some issues with it. I think it could have been absolutely perfect, like probably like a top tier just Clone Wars story in general, if not just a great Star Wars story in general, if for a few changes. But Krell is essentially this bigot, we're led to believe, that just does not care about clones. But he's a Jedi. He's getting his job done. He's trying to get this mission done because Anakin is in the beginning of it for like 2 seconds and bails. And throughout the 4 episodes, we get to like as brutal as I think the show is allowed to go, because it's a kid's show, we see like all these clones get slaughtered and everything, and they start killing each other by accident because they've been, well, not by accident, they were ordered to. They didn't realize they were shooting at each other. And I think it's a really good 4-parter. It deals with a lot of interesting ideas. And then again, not to make it negative because I'm talking about positives, but it is probably my favorite arc of the 4. My issue comes in with at the end of it. I was genuinely like really engaged for the first 3 parts, and in that last part, we learn that General Krell is trying to become this basically dark acolyte like Dooku had in the comics, and join the Separatists. And this was just a way of kind of like showing him that he's worthy of that.
It was his job application.
Yeah, basically, and it just ruined all the nuance for me because I'm like, oh, so he's just evil. I would have preferred that it be more gray. Like that's how it set up the first 3 episodes. That no, he is just a bigot, but he's still a Jedi. He's still doing what the Jedi have commanded him to do. Maybe not exactly in the way they would have interpreted the orders, but he's doing what they called him to do, and he just doesn't give a crap about clones because he doesn't see them as human beings. And that would have been a far more nuanced discussion and arc for the clones. That being said, even though he's still just a stereotypical villain by the end of it, there's still a lot of development for Rex and his clone troopers that's really compelling within those 4 episodes.
Oh, for sure. The clones realize over that arc that the Jedi, it's been bred into them. It's been programmed into them. The Jedi are these almost holy beings to them. The Jedi, whatever they say, that is right, and you follow it. And they're learning that that is not the case over that episode. That is some really good characterization for those clones there, especially the one called Dogma. There's some good arc there.
On the name.
Yeah.
But it actually helps with some of those EU novels where it says, and I also think it says it in the Battlefront 2 game where. For some of the clones, like that was their orders, but some of them, did not like what they had to do, but some of them took pleasure in the order because, well, some people got treated like that, and so they would be more than happy to go gun down those Jedi that treated them like that. And I think that makes that case even more stronger.
Oh,
but again, like
sure.
I said, I just would prefer that it stayed that he was just a bigot, and they had to take him out because he was getting so many clones killed.
And there's several examples even within the EU of Jedi who didn't like their clones. There's Ram Koda as well from Force Unleashed. So
which I also have stated before in other things that I think it would have been actually to fit it into the EU even more would be to have, instead of it being Krell, have it be Ram Koda, somebody who we know is a good guy because we've seen him in the video game Force Unleashed, but make it more nuanced, make it be that he is a good person, and he doesn't necessarily hate the clones, but he has this instinctual just feeling not to trust them, which would, be verified in episode 3 when Order 66 happens. But he could also have some nuance and actually appreciate some of the clones, like Rex. And, maybe in that arc, he got forced to work with clones when he usually only works with, rebels or his own militia, but maybe during that arc, his militia gets killed and he has to recruit more people, but he's stuck with these clones. And to get the mission done, he has to work with them. And that could have been so much more nuanced and interesting and be a huge connection to a video game. And I just thought that would have been a really compelling arc, and it's not what happened.
Okay, but let me ask you, though, and this is probably a subject in and of itself, but is that nuance appropriate for a children's show?
That's true. I think there are ways to do it because I think that's what the show was already kind of doing for the first 3 episodes of with Krell, except they changed it to, oh, he's just a bad guy. But it started off that way for the first 3 episodes. So I think there's a way to make that nuanced without having it be too complex for children.
Right.
Are there good arcs in TCW? I thought I'd mention, obviously, the Darth Maul arcs, as I've already talked about, are really good. I wanted to say that this is probably a controversial one as well, but I really liked the arc, the second Battle of Geonosis, because we really didn't get to explore, even within the EU, we really didn't revisit Geonosis. It was like Attack of the Clones is done, we've done that. We don't need to go back there. I think the Clone Wars video game explored Geonosis just a little bit more.
There was a short story, I think.
video game.
There was a short story shortly after, but
Death in the Catacombs. Right?
Yeah, that was about it, though.
So we had a little bit. Go back and have a whole other battle there. I thought was a really interesting arc. That's one that stood out to me. And I thought maybe we would talk a little bit about the Mortis arc, because I always thought that it was an okay arc. To be honest, when I watched it as a little kid, it scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
That got dark. That got weird. So probably some nightmares. Thanks, Dave. But beyond that, Fate of the Jedi really makes that a better arc. So I wonder, do you guys think that it's a good arc without considering Fate of the Jedi and how Fate of the Jedi ties into it? Or do you think it's only a good arc in our eyes because of how Fate of the Jedi kind of used that arc for its story?
There's this video that I think was included in the DVDs. It's like a 2-3 minute clip. You can find it on YouTube, where Dave Filoni talks about the making of the Mortis arc and says that a lot of the concepts in that episode came directly from George Lucas. I think that this is one area of the Clone Wars where I cannot forgive Filoni or George to the extent that he was involved in the making of the arc, just because I think the Mortis arc is kind of incomprehensible. I thought it was entertaining when I watched it, as well as when I rewatched it more recently. But I think because I rewatched it more recently to get ready for Supernatural Encounters, because I know that it's going to be incorporated there in some aspects. But I just think that it's I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I know Alex has his thoughts on it too. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. And it almost felt to me like it was like, oh, let's make this seemingly deep by introducing all these mystery boxes and these mysterious concepts. And maybe they didn't even know the answers to some of the things that they were introducing. But, because they've introduced all of these questions without giving us the answers, it makes it seem deeper than it is, but it's only really like surface level deep. At the end of the day, we're dealing with, a good side of the Force and like a light side of the Force and a dark side of the Force. Like it's not a weighty concept, but that episode I think tried to introduce some mythology into it to make it seem
deep,
deep, and it didn't strike the right notes with me personally.
Mm-hmm. It comes across like it's not exactly style, no substance, but it's like we're trying to make it seem like there's a whole bunch of substance, but it's like it's an entire cake, but it's just the frosting. Right. And we're giving you that. We're calling that a cake. No, it's just frosting. Where is the cake? It's my birthday. I want my cake. Anyway, I think the issue is, though, I think the EU has helped it, not just with Fate of the Jedi, but the thing that Anakin and they all go into when they even see all these people and all these concepts is this weird triangle-looking thing, which could be, I don't know if it's already been made somewhere in a source book or something, but could easily be a connection to Dawn of the Jedi if somebody wanted to make that a thing. And so that's interesting and cool, and maybe if the EU ever gets continued, that could be expanded upon in the Dawn of the Jedi comics, and with the help of Supernatural Encounter, well, maybe not in comics, but maybe in novels or something, have that actually explored more with the help of Supernatural Encounters and whatever that gives us. You can have a more fleshed out story, and that can make that whole arc make sense and be good. But as it stands, it doesn't really make sense. It's implied that it's a dream because they wake up, but at the same time, we know that it can't be a dream if we're counting it in the EU, because in Fate of the Jedi, Abeloth is a thing. So it wasn't fake. It wasn't a mirage. It actually happened to some extent. As Marcel said, it's interesting. It was entertaining when watching it. The acting is really good in that arc, I think. Sam Witwer again coming back, playing Darth Maul, Star Killer, and not playing the Son, this embodiment of sin of the dark side. It's interesting, but it's not that deep. He basically is just Anakin 2.0 on steroids, where he's just like super edgy and super kind of cringe to me. I mean, I love hearing him talk because it's like a mix of like Palpatine and his own sort of thing that he's bringing into it. But at the end of the day, he's just kind of whining. And so it's not that compelling. I do think it's interesting that Anakin in the arc falls to the dark side because he sees the future. He sees himself become dark. And I think that's an interesting concept, but it doesn't really get explored. He basically just gets Sith eyes, looks really, it's like the opposite of a Sith. Not like the opposite, but like he's just like super sad. And he's like, I have to do this because I turned into Darth Vader. And he's, being bad or whatever. And then he gets stopped and they basically forget that all that happened. And then they go about their day. And it's this whole thing where it's like, certainly if somebody actually does something with it, I could see this being a really good expansion to lore. But all we have right now, it's just this weird thing where, yeah, there's interesting concepts, but there's nothing actually here for me to digest. Like I said, with the frosting, like I can eat that. It's enjoyable, but I'm not going to be fulfilled with that. And so I'm just left just feeling mixed on it. Like I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. It's certainly better than a lot of other Clone Wars episodes. But as Marcel said, it's not really anything. So I'm just left feeling empty.
You guys make some really good points about that arc. I agree completely with you guys about what you guys said about that. But Marcel, what are some arcs that you enjoyed, dare I say, liked in TCW, so that you can forgive Filoni?
One that I recently saw in my rewatch is and I mentioned it earlier in the episode, was the Night Sisters Dathomir arc from season 3, the one that immediately precedes the Mortis arc. I think it's like a 3-episode arc. I had to really put aside the continuity errors that they introduced with regards to Dathomir and the Night Sisters and the witches and all that stuff. I had to just put that out of my head and just watch the episodes on their own merits. But I thought they were really fun episodes. I thought that the showdown with Count Dooku between Ventress and Savage was really good. Even before that, when Ventress and some of the other Night Sisters attack Dooku in his castle on Sereno, and he's like sleeping at the time, and they basically get the jump on him, and he basically goes full Sith on them and Force lightnings all of them and throws them away. And I thought that was a really cool scene, I liked Mother Talzin as a character. I liked the way that they handled Ventress and sort of her, going back home and wanting to get revenge on Dooku. I thought all that was really good, as long as I just don't think about it in the wider context of the expanded universe. But that was a really good arc, I think, and one of the better parts of the Clone Wars show. Another thing that comes to mind is the Battle of Kamino, which they covered in issue 50 of Republic, and I think they did a better job of it in issue 50 of Republic. But if I'm being completely fair to TCW, it was a really dynamic episode.
That I was just gonna say, what did you guys think of the Kamino arc? Because technically it's the second Battle of Kamino. I believe. Right. I believe they actually did explain somewhere that there were 2 separate battles of Kamino. I could be wrong, but I think it makes more sense that way. Anyways, and I think some source said it. I'll have to edit this and see what I can find if there's something. But I always enjoyed the Kamino arc because I watched it before, and I watched it multiple times, and I watched it before I'd read the Republic Kamino arc. When I got to the Republic Kamino arc, I found the Republic Kamino arc to be so much better. So I went back and watched the Clone Wars Kamino arc, thinking, well, I'll still like it this time. And I actually found it to be really stupid the second time, in my opinion. So I was going to ask, what do you guys think overall of the Kamino arc? There's some good things there, like 99, the clone. There's some good stuff there.
Right.
But
his heroic sacrifice.
It's not the arc where Ahsoka fights Dooku. Not Dooku, Grievous.
I don't specifically recall.
I don't remember.
Grievous.
I remember that Asajj Ventress brutally murdered a commander in that episode. I think it was Commander Colt. It was quite dark. So
is that the part where she pulls him onto her lightsaber and then she kisses him on the cheek as he's been impaled?
Yeah.
Kids show. But to give it credit, like that was a cool scene to see that, and me watching that as an adult, thinking that this was a kids show and seeing a scene like that, I was surprised and not, and I was pleasantly surprised because I was like, okay, well, there's like this is a war. There's a show about a war, so there's some actual mature subject matter here, something for adults to kind of enjoy as well. I think what changed in my perception of TCW is that when I watched it the first time, I hadn't really read much of the multimedia project. I hadn't read a bunch of the books. I hadn't read, Republic beyond, I think, Rite of Passage. So beyond basically when it starts to get into into the Clone Wars. And then in between, I read so much of the multimedia project. I watched, Clone Wars 2003, and then I went back and now I'm watching TCW with all this knowledge. And I just don't think it stacks up to the multimedia project in a lot of ways. But I think that the Camino episodes came close.
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes it so hard, because when I was going through TCW completely, probably for the second time in my entire life since I was a kid, watching it as it came out, I was watching it alongside reading the novels and the comics and the short stories. So it's really jarring to go from the Republic comics, which are really dark and gritty, and to have already this excellent, amazing arc of the Battle of Camino, to then go back to it. And it gets props, sure, for that Ventress thing. I think that was cool as well. But so much of TCW is so, for lack of a better word, cartoony with its violence. When 03 is literally a cartoon, and that feels more impactful and more violent than all of 08 does to me. And so I don't think it's just an excuse because it's a kid show, because clearly it was willing to go there sometimes. But the Camino arc, I like the 99 stuff. I like the stuff of the clones. I always have. It's the same character from the earlier arc. Well, I guess it was also in season 3, but it takes place in the past, where they're the cadets and they're getting trained up to be clones.
The Domino Squadron stuff, right?
Yeah. That's all good. I like all that stuff. But I don't know. The Camino arc for me is. I mean, I'm going off of memory. I haven't watched it since I reviewed it, which was like half a year ago now. But it was fine to me. I did not love it, did not hate it, but that just kind of comes with the territory after having read the EU.
When you mentioned Domino Squadron, it's really weird that the Clone Wars show, in and of itself, is out of order chronologically.
Yeah,
you get those episodes that go back and explain about the origin. Because if you,
like season 1 is when it takes place, but it's in like season 3.
Exactly, and in season 1. One of those clones gets eaten by a worm, cut up, and you're just like, oh, there goes a random clone. But then when you watch the Domino Squadron stuff about them as cadets training, cut up was the most interesting of all of them.
Why was that first?
And so why did we just see him get eaten by a worm first? And then there's also, of course, Droid Bait, and he perished as well. I just liked him because, funny name. But I'm sure that was Dave's input there. He's a comedy genius.
Truly.
Well, here's a positive as well as a missed opportunity for you, at least a positive from my perspective. In my rewatches, I really like how they showed young Boba. I know a lot of people don't like this, but I like how they showed young Boba integrating with some of the other bounty hunters and how they kind of took him under their wing and they're training him. But the missed opportunity is Aura Singh. Now, as we know in Republic comics, she was a failed Jedi. She's force sensitive, right? She kills Jedi and collects their lightsabers in the same way that Grievous. I wish that had been portrayed in the show, because if you watch TCW, there is not a hint that she is force sensitive. They never even show that on screen. but it's in the comics, and I think it makes for a more compelling character. And it might have been nice to see, as we talk about nuances, we talk about maybe like complex themes. It might have been nice to see Boba grapple with her as like basically his mentor, but she's also a Force sensitive.
Right.
The person who killed his father was a Force sensitive. I just think it could have added such another layer of complexity to
Absolutely.
their relationship that's missing because they decided to ignore that aspect of Aurra Sing from the expanded universe. But I did like how they showed young Boba, and they got, I think, Daniel Logan back to voice him, and that he was sort of integrated back into the show, because I think that was really, I like to see that. That was nice.
I ultimately agree with that. My only issue is that there comes a point where he starts becoming friends with Bosk. Right. And that seems like a huge contradiction to me, because they were never friends as far as we're aware. They always hated each other. Right. That was a big thing for me that bothered me.
So even disregarding the EU and just taking an Empire Strikes Back, those bounty hunters were all rivals.
Right.
None of them, all of them were trying to be the first one to get there. So like, there's no hint even there that that they're friends. You know,
I mean, theoretically, you could have a story where they were friends and then stopped becoming friends, but we also have the episode 2 Adventures, which I just remember to mention right now, where even back then, when Jango and Boba are on missions, because that was kind of a prequel to the Bounty Hunter Wars, which actually got me excited for Bounty Hunter Wars when I read it. But anyway, episode 2 Adventures has Jango Fett and Boba doing stuff, and they meet Kradosk and Bosk, and even back then, Boba was not a fan of him, which is why I think it bothered me more, because I had been reading it in chronological order. But I do think overall, besides the episode 2 Adventures and the last book of the young adult Boba Fett series, that this might be controversial too. TCW did a way better job with young kid Boba than those young adult books did, because I think those young adult books with him are absolutely atrocious.
Yeah.
I actually enjoyed those young readers novels, but hearing you guys talk about young Boba Fett there made me think of bounty hunters, right? And so then I got thinking about the Box arc. That's an episode arc that I really enjoyed personally. I thought that was excellent. It was like
the one where Obi-Wan's pretending to be a bounty hunter.
Yes, Racco Hardeen, and they're competing in an to the death challenge. To be the hand-picked bounty hunters of Dooku. And there's like this game master who's Moralo Eval is his name. And then all of these bounty hunters are competing in the box, which is essentially like a escape room. But lots of people die in horrible ways. You know, it's a kid's show. But, you know, the box got pretty dark. What did you guys think of that arc? I personally enjoyed that one a lot.
I get what they're going for, because they wanted to show another reason why Anakin might leave the Order, but I don't believe that Obi-Wan would lie to Anakin. Like, why? Like, he could have just told Anakin, because he trusts Anakin with his life, and I just find it arbitrary that he would keep it a secret that he's this bounty hunter. I mean, there's a really funny meme where he gets kicked in the nuts by Anakin. That's pretty funny. But I don't know. It just doesn't feel like Obi-Wan.
Remind me, is that, because I haven't gotten to this one of my rewatches yet, but is that the one where Obi-Wan alters his look completely?
Yeah.
Okay. In Republic comics, Anakin thinks he's dead, but he's been kidnapped and he's being tortured by Ventress. And I thought that when I remember thinking about that episode when I was reading the Republic comics, because I had seen it first, the episode, and then I read the Republic comics after, and I was like, oh, this reminds me of that Clone Wars episode, but I really think the Republic comics kind of do it better because the stakes seem higher.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. It seemed like it had more of an impact on Anakin's character and maybe his turn to the dark side, right?
Yeah.
I'm one of those people who believes that Anakin probably always would have turned to the dark side. Maybe I don't know. People say like if Qui-Gon was his master, maybe he wouldn't have. But I think that he always would have turned to the dark side. But I think that there are some very clear things that occur throughout his life and in the expanded universe that precipitate that fall. And I think Obi-Wan being captured and tortured, and Anakin being on his own and having to make that tough call on Jabin, or you know, almost killing Asherad Het. Though in the Republic comics, those are all things that I think, without Obi-Wan's guidance, precipitated his fall to the dark side.
Yeah. I just find it completely against his character that he would go, like, he would let his friend think he was dead, his brother think that he was dead, just so he could do this mission where he infiltrates, like, some bounty hunters.
Right.
Like, even if the Jedi told him to do that, Obi-Wan would just be like, yeah, I'm going to pretend to be dead for a while, so I think the excuse was, well, we needed his reaction to be genuine or something. But it's like, it just seems like an overtop way to make the Jedi look bad. So you go, oh, well, here's another reason why Anakin might have fallen to the dark side. But again, the Republic comics, it wasn't Obi-Wan's choice. It was forced upon him. He was being tortured. So, in as far as Anakin was concerned, he had no idea that he was still alive. So that works better to me than Obi-Wan knowingly doing that to him.
Right. This Forgiving Filoni episode would not be complete without me asking what you thought of those lost episodes, specifically the one where Yoda, where Yoda tracks down the mystery of how to live after death, right? And he confronts the spirit or apparition of Darth Bane.
Well, we are getting off topic from Forgiving Filoni because I don't like a single episode from season 6.
Okay.
Season 6 to me cannot be canon. I know it probably is in continuity. Actually, I think it came out slightly after the buyout, so I might be wrong on that. But regardless, I'm not. Is it not?
The Lost Missions were 2014. I'm sorry.
Yes, so it's not. It's not canon. Frick it. I will accept that.
Oh, wait.
No, it was before the EU was canceled, though.
Damn. Regardless, it is not canon in my head. I don't do that with anything else in the EU, but I have to because there's so many problems with that arc or with that season. First off, what's his name? Valorum is still alive,
right,
which objectively cannot be the case at all. There's no way. He's dead. He's been dead for a while, especially if you're putting in the last year of the Clone Wars.
Okay, bear with me. 2 Finis Valorums.
It's the same point to just die again, because I think he dies at the end of that arc, so we can explain why he's not there, but he's already dead in the Republic comics, so... But there's that. Then there's everything with Sifo Dyas, which the EU, much simpler, they killed him off because loose end, why would you ever allow him to be alive? And TCW goes, no, Sifo Dyas is just some crazy homeless person in this place somewhere, and Anakin and Obi-Wan, this is basically the plot of Labyrinth of Evil, but using Sifo Dyas for some reason to be like, oh, they're about to find out everything, they're about to find out, we gotta stop it real quick before they find out about Sidious, but it's not nearly as cool, and feels just so weird. Like, why would Sidious ever allow Sifo Dyas to just exist with the information he has, when it's just much simpler to kill him? It's abhorrent to me. As for the Yoda arc, I guess it's fine. It's weird. I don't know what the fudge those things are. The wills, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it will be expanded upon in Supernatural Encounters, but I don't know. It's weird. Darth Bane doesn't look like Darth Bane, but it's voiced by Mark Hamill. And then he fights Sidious on a walkway for some reason. I don't know. That one's the least offensive to me, but I don't like it very much. Right. So that's my thoughts. I'm sorry. I could not forgive Filoni for season 6.
Season 6 isn't bad to me. And it was released after Disney had bought Star Wars, but it was still released before the EU was canceled. So, like, are you saying that you consider everything after the buyout non-canon to the EU? Like, that would include Dawn of the Jedi, right?
No, and I understand. I went back on it when you said that. I accept that season 6 is canon. I just refuse to accept it. It's the one thing that I cannot reconcile until I see somebody else smarter than me do it. So I will not accept it until someone like Leland Shee or Supernatural Encounters does it for me, which fixes every single piece of garbage that is in that season. Will I be willing to accept that in my head? I'm sorry. I'm very negative on that season. And I did not rewatch it in my reviews because I refused to.
To me, it's not bad, but it wasn't good. It was just kind of okay.
correct me if I'm wrong. Is it season 6 that really brings home the whole inhibitor chip thing?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's the
Yes,
season
that's
that
another
does
thing I
that.
forgot to mention.
Yeah, the inhibitor chip issue I think really lacks nuance. Right? It's just like, oh, they're evil because
Yeah,
switch was flipped.
I hate it.
I don't like it either. I think that the inhibitor chip really makes things too black and white, and again, it's a missed opportunity to include some nuance in the story. And you know, I acknowledge that this is a kids show, but I don't think that we should necessarily treat these issues as issues that kids cannot understand. Right? There was an opportunity here to educate children on some of the complexities of life, and instead they dumbed it down. And so I don't care for the inhibitor chip. I think it's not the finest thing. So it's something that I cannot forgive Filoni for. But
No.
you know, I think in fairness, season 6 being a bit of a misstep overall might be due to the fact that it was cut short, and you know, they didn't get the full season that they wanted, and they had to wrap up some stories. And
I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know, like, if it is canon, which it probably is, then there are inhibitor chips. It's just nowhere else, anywhere, is it mentioned that there's any chips, and it's
That's
just so much. It's so much more compelling that they simply get the order and they obey because that's what they've been bred to do. And then when you have the clones that refuse to do it, like in Dark Lord Rise of Darth Vader, you have some clones that refuse to do it and they get shot down for it. But that's because they built up a good relationship with the Jedi and everything. You know, some were just following orders, obeying the Jedi and doing all that. So, you know, when the time comes, you know, well, orders are orders, shoot down. And then some of them mistreated badly, like we talked about earlier, and they're more than happy to gun them down. But then there's those few that have a really close relationship with the Jedi. And so when that order comes, they're like, hell no, we're not doing this, because they've built up enough willpower and free will to do that. And then they get shot down. That's so much more emotionally compelling than I'm being forced to do this. I don't know. That's just what I think.
They were able to overcome their conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a more compelling message too.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, yeah, you were raised essentially
Mm-hmm.
to carry out a mission. They're basically sleeper agents.
Yeah.
This was indoctrinated, this was drained, this was drilled right into their brains. But some of them are
sleepwalk through life, activated through a simple phrase.
Overcome their basic biological programming and choose peace over violence. And I think that's a more compelling message than, oh yeah, they just short-circuited the chip and therefore they were able to, you know, overcome the compulsion to kill the Jedi.
Yeah, it reminds me of a video game, BioShock. Which, spoilers for that game. But near the end of the game, the huge twist of the game is it plays on the trope of video games, which is that, you know, you get objectives, you complete them, and you don't think much about it. So at the end of the game, and it really, I think, fits well with the theme of the clones in Star Wars, is because throughout the game you get minor choices because it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Do you save these little girls or do you harvest them for more power? But by the end of the game, you meet Andrew Ryan, who's in charge of this city, and he tells you, like, bro, you've been doing all this because you've been mind controlled to do it since you were born. That you were bred to sleepwalk through life till activated by a simple phrase, would you kindly do this, would you kindly do that?
That's right.
Yeah. And so that's the big revelation of the game, is that you have not been doing anything of your own free will this entire game. You know, and part of the end of the game, at the end of the game, doesn't really, the gameplay doesn't really fit what you're trying to do. But the theme is that, like, you're breaking free of that conditioning, and that works the same with the clones when they've built up a connection with their Jedi masters and break free of that when Order 66 comes and they say no. And that's just so much more compelling and interesting under that guidance than everybody has chips in their brain and they gotta do it anyway. Now, I mean, I've seen parts of season 7, and Rex, you know, he holds the gun in front of Ahsoka and he doesn't shoot. He doesn't want to shoot, but he's still being forced to do something. Like, eventually he still does shoot at Ahsoka So even though he loves Ahsoka, and they have, as you mentioned before, they have such a strong relationship, he has a chip in his brain, so he can resist a little bit, but ultimately he's going to have to compel with that command, which is just far less compelling than them simply being able to resist it or not resist it because they're more than happy to.
So I think in summary for me, it's much easier to forgive Filoni for seasons 3, 4, and 5 of TCW. Yeah. But when it comes to seasons 1, 2, and 6, it is very hard for me to forgive him. And we say forgive Filoni, knowing full well that, he was the supervising director of the show, but a lot of part of this came from George, part of this came from other, creatives writers who wrote the episodes and stuff like that. So we're using this in sort of the most generous sense of the term, forgiving Filoni, not specifically Dave's fault or anything like that, but as supervising director, I forgive him for seasons 3, 4, and 5, because if I put aside my issues with the contradictions to the EU, I can enjoy those. I can enjoy a lot of those episodes in those seasons, because that's when the show really, especially with the Umbara arc at the beginning of season 4, I think that's when the show really, really begins to take off, and it just doesn't really stop until the end of season 5. But when it comes to all the contradictions, blatant contradictions that are throughout those seasons as well as 6, it's harder to forgive him, as well as seasons 1 and 2 just weren't that compelling. And it's almost like I hate when people say like, oh, you just got to get through the first couple seasons of the show too. I'm guilty of this too, because I say this all the time with the Star Trek shows like Next Generation, Space Nine,
DS9.
Yeah, you just got to get through the first few seasons and then it's amazing, right? But that is truly the case with the Clone Wars.
It actually is great.
Yeah. So the Clone Wars, it does get better over time.
That's truly the case with Deep Space Nine. It is fantastic by the 3rd season, but those first 2 seasons, my goodness,
it's finding its footing. That's all. But we're not talking about Star Trek today. But I pretty much agree with Marcel. I forgive Filoni for parts of season 3, pretty much all 4 and 5. And I forgot to mention earlier, but another arc that I genuinely thought was good, minus the big glaring flaw that we all know about, is that last arc with Ahsoka. When I rewatched it, I genuinely found myself feeling bad that no one believed her.
Right.
And that, besides Anakin. And she's on the run from the Jedi and the clones, and she's trying to clear her name. And, that last arc, that one, actually, if you're willing to accept that Ahsoka is this younger sister, to Anakin, and he was afraid of losing his sister, and then in episode 3 he's afraid of losing his significant other. At the end of the arc, she doesn't die, she just leaves, but she's never coming back as far as we're aware. And so this, I think in the most positive light that I've tried to look at Ahsoka when rewatching it, trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, that the Clone Wars is really dark and gritty. And when we look at the Republic comics, Anakin was getting darker and darker and darker. And if you accept that TCW takes place in the last year of the war like I do, then Ahsoka was this one bright spot that kind of, if he was on a scale and he was like going plummeting toward darkness, she was something that kind of bounced him back a bit and put him back in the middle. Kind of like the KOTOR thing with the light and dark side, those point that system. But then she leaves. And I think it's a genuine reason for him to be upset with the Jedi Order, even though he keeps most of that stuff inside of his head and he doesn't actually voice how he feels. And that's one of his biggest issues, is he simply does not communicate with Obi-Wan or anyone else what he's feeling. And if he did, it might genuinely help him, but he bottles it all up inside. And so when he sees his sister just get betrayed like this and not given the benefit of the doubt, and then she bails, and he says at the end of it, I understand why you want to leave. I want to do too. I thought that last arc, besides the glaring flaw of Barra Sophie, which pisses me off, other than that, I thought it was generally well directed, well acted. It was a great send off for somebody who I hated at the beginning, and found myself genuinely caring about her outcome at the end. That was the best thing that, besides the Umbaran arc, was probably the best arc I think that Filoni did. The Filoni show had.
Agreed.
So that's the very definition of character development. Take a character at the beginning who the audience doesn't like, doesn't care about, and to, at the end, have the haters of that character admit that they can care about that character and were genuinely concerned about what the outcome for that character would be. That is the very definition of character development. That character completely changed over that time. So to Filoni's credit, we can forgive him for that because, like you guys are saying, it was an arc that, well, yeah, it was done pretty well.
Minus Bear Sophie.
Yeah. Could have been
Minus
any other
Bear
Jedi.
Sophie, indeed.
Could have been any other Jedi, but they had to use her.
Yeah.
It was actually a Ba'aris Ofi.
That's right.
Yep.
Bear with me. 2 Barris Ophies.
Bear with me. 3 Bear Sophies.
3 Barris Ophies.
Yeah. A trinity of them.
Yeah, I tried to argue that Evan Peel or Even Peel was
Evan Peeling.
Yeah, he had a twin brother that was also a Jedi of the same name, and
Yeah.
that's why we have the 2 different deaths.
Yeah.
Definitely. Same with Adi Gallia then.
All right,
Same
as she
with
gets
Adi Gallia.
impaled by Savage.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could have been
and
any Jedi,
also
but it had to
killed
be
by
her.
Grievous.
All right. Yeah.
Indeed. But that's another. I can forgive Filoni for that because I genuinely think her death is done better in TCW than in the Republic comics. Because if you think about it, Adi Gallia has been a huge friend to Obi-Wan since the Jedi Apprentice books. So it's more
That's true.
impactful that he would be with her
There.
when she dies rather
That's
than
fair.
yeah, and would feel concerned. I think her death is done better in TCW.
That's a fair point.
One other thing that I can forgive Filoni for before we end this is I think that the cast of the Clone Wars did a great job. The voice actors. I only know a couple of them by name.
Yeah.
Is it Matt Lanter? I think is one of them. Ashley Eckstein.
Who was Obi-Wan?
James
Obi-Wan.
Arnold Taylor. Was that the one?
Yeah, the guy who did Obi-Wan was really good.
So I think that they did a great job, all of them. I think D. Bradley Baker was also in it. He was Captain Rex.
Yeah.
Thought all of them did a great job, and they should be commended for their work. Really, this entire discussion, if it's highlighted one thing for me, it's that we think that there are these really good stories in TCW, but we just keep coming back to the continuity errors.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
true.
Yeah.
And
It shows how inexcusable they are, right? That we just can't get over that. We try to enjoy the stories that we genuinely think are good, but we can't get past it because of the continuity, which brings back the talking point that we were talking about a lot earlier about if there weren't continuity issues and contradictions from TCW to the EU, we probably all would enjoy it more.
Yeah.
I started this discussion thinking, even with those continuity errors aside, I think the show's just okay. But now having reminisced about some of these arcs, I actually think it's better than okay. But it really is the continuity errors that detract from my enjoyment of the show overall.
Yeah.
Yeah, me as well.
Yeah. You know what? You have changed all of us talking together has changed my mind. I think it is a good show that is very flawed, apart from the continuity errors, because there's a lot of just bad episodes. They're just awful. But the continuity errors are the freaking cherry on top that just makes me so pissed off about it. But it is a good show with merit. It just, there are flaws in it, and as an EU fan, it's extremely frustrating.
That's right.
Oh, for sure. Yep. Definitely.
Because there didn't need to be. Like, there didn't, when we think about some of the most glaring continuity errors, like Barris Ophi, for example, is a good example. It could have been another Jedi that they created for that arc.
Right.
I know maybe it wouldn't have the same impact because we have Barriss and Ahsoka teaming up in earlier episodes.
Yeah.
But I honestly think that there just didn't need to be the continuity errors to the extent that there were in that show. And it's a missed opportunity because, change Ventress's backstory, fine, retcon it. Bring Maul back, fine. But there are things like character deaths that could have been avoided because we know that they died elsewhere in the expanded universe.
Yeah.
That's why it's hard to forgive Filoni.
Yeah, it's hard to forgive Filoni, but we're trying.
I think that this episode has made me think about, Filoni says that he's an EU fan. So if he is an EU fan, he should have known about the stuff that he was contradicting. So like Marcel said, it was completely unnecessary, and that's why we can't get over it. And
yeah,
what we've really outlined here is that it's hard to forgive Filoni because of these glaring mistakes. There are gems and good stuff in TCW, but just the contradictions are so hard to overlook. It's just really hard to forgive that, I think, overall.
Mm-hmm. But, my favorite character in the EU, apart from, of course, the Skywalkers and Solos, is Kip Duran. And Luke Skywalker forgave him and let him become a Jedi again because he helped him defeat the Sun Crusher. And Luke also forgave his father, despite all the terrible things that Darth Vader had done. So I think we should all try to be like Luke Skywalker, and despite the dark side evils that Filoni has allowed in his TV show, we should be like Luke Skywalker and learn to forgive Filoni.
I'm more like Leia Organa Solo. I'm gonna have to go to Filoni's hometown, like in Tatooine Ghost, and find out how he was raised, and then maybe after all that, I'll be able to.
Fair enough. Maybe you'll name the next kid Filoni.
I'm gonna. I'm gonna find myself settled in between those approaches, in between outright forgiveness and a skeptical research forgiveness. Somewhere in between the Luke and Leia approach, there is where I will lie personally.
Okay. Well, surprisingly, even though we all have negative opinions on the Filoni show, we have surprisingly talked about a great number of positive things and have somehow now managed to debut our longest episode of the Expanded Universe podcast that we're doing, which is kind of crazy, off of Filoni. So thank you. I've also forgiven Filoni for giving us this incredible episode.
And thank you both for having me.
And
yeah, of course.
Sure, we couldn't have done it without you since, you are his lookalike. You are Dave.
Now after saying all these nice things about TCW and Filoni, I need to go take a cold shower.
Well, fair enough. I mean, we all should do such things afterwards to cleanse us of what we've just said.
Maybe instead of a shower, we need to immerse ourselves in a work by James Luceno to cleanse our senses.
Unfortunately, I'm going to go further in doo-doo because my next thing I must read is Planet of Twilight. So unfortunately, I will only be in more of the dumps.
Next episode, Forgiving Barbara Hambly.
Impossible. You ask the impossible. I need more men.
That's so good. That's brilliant. Join me, Marcel, and together we can destroy Callista.
Indeed.
But yeah. Well, that's pretty much it for our Filoni talk. May we never speak of Filoni again. No, I'm just kidding. I don't care. But I think it's time for us to head out and get ready for next week for our next topic in the Expanded Universe.
May the Force be with you.
See you then.
And to you. Bye-bye.